The One Year Bible, the Living Bible Paraphrase, February 28. And the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron and his sons and all the people of Israel, that if an Israelite or other person living among you offers a burnt offering sacrifice to the Lord, whether it is to fulfill a promise or as a spontaneous free will offering, it will only be acceptable to the Lord if it is a male animal without defect. It must be a young bull or a sheep or a goat. Anything that has a defect must not be offered, for it will not be accepted. Anyone sacrificing a peace offering to the Lord from the herd or flock, whether to fulfill a vow or a voluntary offering, must sacrifice an animal that has no defect, or it will not be accepted. An animal that is blind or disabled or mutilated, or which has sores or itch or any other skin disease, must not be offered to the Lord. It is not a fit burnt offering for the altar of the Lord. If the young bull or lamb presented to the Lord has anything superfluous or lacking in its body parts, it may be offered as a free will offering, but not for a vow. An animal that has injured genitals, crushed or castrated, shall not be offered to the Lord at any time. This restriction applies to the sacrifices made by foreigners among you, as well as those made by yourselves. For no defective animal is acceptable for the sacrifice. And the Lord said to Moses, "When a bullock, sheep, or goat is born, it shall be left with its mother for 7 days, but from the 8th day onward it is acceptable as a sacrifice by fire to the Lord. You shall not slaughter a mother animal and her offspring the same day, whether she is a cow or ewe. When you offer the Lord a sacrifice of thanksgiving, you must do it in the right way, eating the sacrificial animal the same day it is slain. Leave none of it for the following day. I am the Lord. You must keep all of my commandments, for I am the Lord. You must not treat me as common and ordinary. Revere me and hallow me, for I, the Lord, made you holy to myself, and rescued you from Egypt to be my own people. I am Jehovah." The Lord said to Moses, "Announce to the people of Israel that they are to celebrate several annual festivals of the Lord, times when all Israel will assemble and worship me. These are in addition to your Sabbaths, the 7th day of the week, which are always days of rest in every home, times for assembling to worship, and for resting from the normal business of the week. These are the holy festivals which are to be observed each year. The Passover of the Lord, this is to be celebrated on the 1st day of April, beginning at sundown. The Festival of Unleavened Bread, this is to be celebrated beginning the day following the Passover, and for 7 days you must not eat any bread made with yeast. On the 1st day of this festival you shall gather the people for worship, and all ordinary work shall cease. You shall do the same on the 7th day of the festival. On each day of the intervening days you shall make an offering by fire to the Lord. The festival of firstfruits, when you arrive in the land I will give you, and you reap your first harvest, bring the first sheaf of the harvest to the priest on the day after the Sabbath. He shall wave it before the Lord in a gesture of offering, and it will be accepted by the Lord as your gift. That same day you shall sacrifice to the Lord a male yearling lamb without defect as a burnt offering. A grain offering shall accompany it, consisting of 1/5 of a bushel of finely ground flour mixed with olive oil, to be offered by fire to the Lord. This will be very pleasant to him. Also offering a drink offering consisting of 3 pints of wine. Until this is done, you must not eat any of the harvest for yourselves. neither fresh kernels, nor bread, nor parched grain. This is a permanent law throughout your nation. The Harvest Festival, Festival of Pentecost. 50 days later you shall bring to the Lord an offering of a sample of the new grain of your latter crops. This shall consist of 2 loaves of bread from your homes, to be waved before the Lord in a gesture of offering. Bake this bread from the 1/5 of a bushel of fine flour containing yeast. It is an offering to the Lord of the first sampling of your latter crops. Along with the bread and the wine you shall sacrifice as burnt offerings to the Lord 7 yearling lambs without defects, 1 young bull and 2 rams. All are fire offerings, very acceptable to Jehovah. And you shall offer 1 male goat for a sin offering and 2 male yearling lambs for a peace offering. The priest shall wave these offerings before the Lord along with the loaves, representing the first sampling of your latter crops. They are holy to the Lord and will be given to the priest as food. That day shall be announced as a time of sacred convocation of all the people. Don't do any work that day. This is a law to be honored from generation to generation. When you reap your harvest, you must not thoroughly reap all the corners of the fields, nor pick up the fallen grain. Leave it for the poor and for the foreigners living among you, who have no land of their own. I am Jehovah your God. The Festival of Trumpets, mid-September, is a time for all the people to meet together for worship. It is a time of remembrance, and is to be announced by loud blowing of trumpets. Don't do any hard work on that day, but offer a sacrifice by fire to the Lord. The Day of Atonement follows 9 days later. All the people are to come together before the Lord, saddened by their sin, and they shall offer sacrifices by fire to the Lord. Don't do any work that day, for it is a special day for making atonement before the Lord your God. Anyone who does not spend the day in repentance and sorrow for sin shall be excommunicated from his people. And I'll put to death anyone who does any kind of work that day. This is the law of Israel from generation to generation. For this is a Sabbath of rest, and in it you shall go without food and be filled with sorrow. This time for atonement begins in the evening and continues throughout the next day. The Festival of Shelters. 5 days later, on the last day of September, is the Festival of Shelters, to be celebrated before the Lord for 7 days. On the first day there will be a sacred assembly of all the people. Don't do any hard work that day. On each of the 7 days of the festival you are to sacrifice an offering by fire to the Lord. The 8th day requires another sacred convocation of all the people, at which time there will be again an offering by fire to the Lord. It is the closing assembly, and no regular work is permitted. These then are the regular annual festivals, sacred convocations of all people, when offerings to the Lord are to be made by fire. These annual festivals are in addition to your regular Sabbaths, the weekly days of holy rest. The sacrifices made during the festivals are to be in addition to your regular giving and normal fulfillment of your vows. This last day of September, at the end of your harvesting, is the time to begin to celebrate this 7-day festival before the Lord. Remember that the first and last days of the festival are special days of rest. On the first day take boughs of fruit trees laden with fruit, and palm fronds, and the boughs of leafy trees, such as willows that grow by the brooks, and build shelters with them, rejoicing before the Lord your God for 7 days. This 7-day annual feast is a law from generation to generation. During those 7 days, all of you who are native Israelites are to live in these shelters. The purpose of this is to remind the people of Israel, generation after generation, that I rescued you from Egypt and caused you to live in shelters. I am Jehovah, your God. So Moses announced these annual festivals of the Lord to the people of Israel. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verse 30 through chapter 10, verse 12. Leaving that region, they traveled through Galilee, where he tried to avoid all publicity in order to spend more time with his disciples, teaching them. He would say to them, I, the Messiah, am going to be betrayed and killed, and 3 days later I will return to life again. But they didn't understand and were afraid to ask him what he meant. And so they arrived at Capernaum. When they were settled in the house where they were to stay, he asked them, What were you discussing out on the road? But they were ashamed to answer, for they had been arguing about which of them was the greatest. He sat down and called them around him and said, Anyone wanting to be the greatest must be the least and servant of all. Then he placed a little child among them, and taking the child in his arms, he said to them, Anyone who welcomes a little child like this in my name is welcoming me, and anyone who welcomes me is welcoming my Father who sent me. One of his disciples, John, told him one day, Teacher, we saw a man using your name to cast out demons, but we told him not to, for he isn't one of our group. Don't forbid him, Jesus said, for no one doing miracles in my name will quickly turn against me. Anyone who isn't against us is for us. If anyone so much as gives you a cup of water because you are Christ, I say this solemnly, he won't lose his reward. But if someone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to lose faith, it would be better for that man if a huge millstone were tied about his neck and he were thrown into the sea. If your hand does wrong, cut it off. Better live forever with one hand than be thrown into the unquenchable fires of hell with two. If your foot carries you toward evil, cut it off. Better be lame and live forever than have 2 feet that carry you to hell. And if your eye is sinful, gouge it out. Better enter the kingdom of God half blind than have 2 eyes and see the fires of hell, where the worm never dies and the fire never goes out, where all are salted with fire. Good salt is worthless if it loses its saltiness. It can't season anything, so don't lose your flavor. Live in peace with each other. Then he left Capernaum and went southward to the Judean border and into the area east of the Jordan River. And as always, there were crowds, and as usual he taught them. Some Pharisees came and asked him, Do you permit divorce? Of course they were trying to trap him. What did Moses say about divorce? Jesus asked them. He said it was all right, they replied. He said that all a man has to do is write his wife a letter of dismissal. Why did he say that? Jesus asked. I'll tell you why. It was a concession to your hard-hearted wickedness. It was a concession to your hard-hearted wickedness. But it certainly isn't God's way. For from the very first he made man and woman to be joined together permanently in marriage. Therefore a man is to leave his father and mother and he and his wife are united so that they are no longer two, but one. And no man may separate what God has joined together. Later, when he was alone with his disciples in the house, they brought up the subject again. He told them, when a man divorces his wife to marry someone else, he commits adultery against her. And if a wife divorces her husband and remarries, she too commits adultery. Psalm 44 verses 1 through 7. O God, we have heard of the glorious miracles you did in the days long ago. Our forefathers have told us how you drove the heathen nations from this land and gave it all to us, spreading Israel from one end of the country to the other. They did not conquer but their own they did not conquer by their own strength and skill, but by your mighty power, and because you smiled upon them and favored them. You are my King and my God. Decree victories for your people, for it is only by your power and through your name that we tread down our enemies. I do not trust my weapons. They could never save me. Only you can give us the victory over those who hate us. Proverbs chapter 10 verse 19. Don't talk so much. You keep putting your foot in your mouth. Be sensible and turn off the flow.